The death of Lazarus, part 2. Now, if you were not here last Sunday, do not fret. Think of your favorite action TV show, where it's a two-parter, and the second episode comes on and says, last week on Hawaii Five-0, I'm dating myself. Not necessarily, there was another one, but anyway, that's a whole other sermon. Last week on Hawaii Five-0, and then you get, clips. In a moment, I'm going to give you a couple clips if you weren't here last week to bring you up to speed. I don't know much about prisms, P-R-I-S-M-S. I really only know what I Google. But prisms, and I see my prism here. I brought a prism with me this morning. And I've got a note here. Prisms are polyhedrons. I don't really know what that means, but that's what prisms are. And light hits a prism, and the light refracts. The light refracts. Some of you are engineers, and you know a lot more about this than I do. And refract means the light bends. And I've got a prism at home, and if you hold a prism up to the light's hitting it, and the light refracts. And if you turn it, you'll get a reaction. You get different colors, right? See this story of Lazarus as a prism. Because on one level it's about Jesus, on another level it's about God. Certainly at one level, as we twist the prism, it's about Lazarus. But guess what? Ultimately, at the end of this message, I want you to know that it's about you, and it's about me. Let's turn the prism there. All of this scriptural information needs to lead us to that. Now, architects have found a bunch of these. Architects have found a whole lot of grave sites that come from Jesus' time. And just like today, the more money you had, the more elaborate your tomb was. And Lazarus and Mary and Martha were probably fairly wealthy people. That's a conservative estimate. They lived in Bethsaida, and a story that we're going to hear in a couple of weeks involves people like Joseph of Arimathea. Jesus was ultimately entombed in Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. Joseph of Arimathea was wealthy. More about that when you come back to church in 2 weeks. But the way these tombs worked was most of them were cut out of the side of rocky hills. And the creators of these tombs would cut out the rock down here, and it would come up about to your waist. And it was one of these arches. And because there's no soft way to put this, it's much easier to get a body in that way if you put the body in at ground level. And many of the tombs that were created by people with means was the artisan would create a stone, a circular stone, and engineer it so that it was actually attached to the side of the wall, and all you had to do was push that stone and cover the grave. Again, more about that in a couple of weeks, because I'm going to share with you the resurrection account as it is recorded for us by John, who says that when Mary first got to the tomb, the scripture is very specific. It says that she bent over to look in. Now remember, we're turning this prism, and the light refracts. And because this is about a lot of things, it's also about you and me. And now I'm rolling away Lazarus' stone. I'm rolling it, I'm opening it up. And I'm inviting you to look in. And you are amazed, aren't you, at what you see? Because not only is Lazarus in there, you know what else is in there? You're amazed right now, aren't you? Because you see, in addition to Lazarus, you see that part of your life that needs to be resurrected. You see it. Isn't it amazing? That fear, that anger, that apathy. I can see the amazement on your faces. It's in there. Now, last week on the death of Lazarus, part 1, I remind you that we learned a lot, didn't we? And 3 things that we learned was that at the beginning of this story, Mary and Martha come to Jesus and they say, Jesus, the one who you love, and translated that is, Lazarus was probably Jesus' best friend, to put it in our vernacular. And they tell him that Lazarus is ill, probably on the verge of death. And Jesus incredibly and amazingly says, first of all, he's not going to die. And secondly, this isn't about Lazarus. Remember that? It's incredible. This isn't about Lazarus. This is about God. And this is about me. That's what he said. And then he says, I'm paraphrasing here, this is all about glorifying God through me, Jesus says. And I remember last week I gave you sort of an assignment. I invited you to consider the possibility of going out to your family and friends and saying to them, this is my job too. And if you're married, you can say to your spouse, honey, I'm going to glorify God. God's going to be glorified through me today. So watch. I hope none of you did that. But that's the mentality. Jesus was essentially saying, would you like to know the nature of God through this story of Lazarus? If you would, then watch me and listen to me. And then thirdly, last week on the death of Lazarus, we learned that Jesus loved loved Martha, and loved Lazarus. He loved them. I want to read to you something that Chris didn't read to you because I didn't ask her to. But these are the verses leading up to what we heard today. And I have them printed up here in very small print, so here I go. This is what happened. Now remember, Jesus said, if you want to know what God is like, if you want to know the nature of God, watch me. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. Now, these are my words. Remember, we're going to learn about God. Jesus said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. And Jesus began to weep. Apparently, you and I worship a God who weeps. Very well-known Protestant minister in the 1950s and 60s and into the 70s. Some of you will remember this name. He was very active in the civil rights movement, nationally known. And a minister who had the wonderful name, of William Sloane Coffin. Remember? Reverend Coffin. I love it. One of my heroes. William Sloane Coffin was pastor of the Riverside Church in New York City at the time. And tragically and sadly, while he was pastor there in the 60s, one of his young children died. A young son died. And William Sloane Coffin took the appropriate time off from his job as pastor at Riverside Church to deal with the grief, to deal with the family. And after the appropriate time, he came back to work. He came back to be pastor. John tells us that we worship a God who weeps. In the first sermon that he preached, coming back to Riverside Church, William Sloane Coffin stood before the people, preached his sermon, and in the midst of that sermon, he said this. He said, I want to thank you all for your support. I want to thank you all for your love. And I want you to know what I believe. He said, I believe that the moment my son died, the first heart to break was God's. We worship a God who weeps. So, hear this. John tells us, the writer John tells us that they rolled away Lazarus' stone, right? They rolled it away, getting up to this point. They rolled away the stone. Did you notice the first thing that Jesus did? As soon as they rolled away the stone, what did Jesus do? When you and I are faced with challenges in life, and there are oh so many these days, what is the first thing that we are called to do? We are called to do the first thing that Jesus did. The first thing Jesus did was he prayed. Did you notice that? He prayed. I'm reading a book to fall asleep at night, which I've done my whole life, including starting as a kid. And I'm reading a book right now about the Ohio State Buckeyes football team. And it was written by Bill Rabinowitz, who was a sport, he's still alive and well, doing very well, but now he has podcasts and things. For decades, he was a sports writer at the Columbus Dispatch. And just last night, it's funny how the Spirit works, when my sermon was already prepared, just last night, I was reading about the national championship that the football team played. The Buckeyes played a couple of years ago. It was a semifinal game against Texas. And they ended up winning the game. And this was the critical game when Jack, I'm spacing on his last name, a defensive tackle. Jack Sawyer. Thanks, John. And I know I'm losing all of you sports haters now, but I'll get you back. I'll get you back. But Jack Sawyer made this spectacular play. It was a critical time, and Texas was driving, and it was great. It was, are we going to win? Are we going to lose? And the defensive tackle, Jack Sawyer, sacked the Texas quarterback. The quarterback fumbled, and Sawyer picked up the ball, and he ran about 80 yards for a touchdown. Very exciting. Does anybody else remember this? Yeah? Well, in the book I was reading last night, in that chapter, they spoke with about 15 of the players. Bill Rabinowitz, the writer, spoke with about 15 or 20 of the Ohio State players and asked them to describe what you were feeling, what you were experiencing at that moment in the football game. Talked to about 15, 20 of them. Out of the 15 to 20 players, I swear, 90% of them said, the first thing I did was start to pray. The first thing I did was start to pray. Now this opens up a whole can of worms theologically. Does God really care who wins the game? I say no. But these players, the first thing they did was pray. And you know, where I hang my theological hat on that is, you can do a lot worse, right? Go ahead and pray. The first thing Jesus did when they rolled away the stone, he prayed. And in my 8th grade confirmation class, my dad taught us that prayer is communication with God. Jesus gives thanks for his relationship with God. Jesus prays so that everyone gathered at Lazarus' tomb can know what Jesus knows. That Jesus does nothing on his own. Everything he does is God's action in and through him. And the way this story ends is very abrupt. We get very little details. We get a little bit, but we get very few. Jesus says simply, Lazarus, come out. Take off the grave clothes and let him go. This story is about us taking off any grave clothes today that we are wearing. It's about embracing the fact that every breath we take is a gift from God and a gift from the cosmos. Every moment we live is resurrection. The gift of the Christ within is not just to be realized in the crisis of death, but in all moments of life. We take off the grave clothes of fear and we go. And I'll leave you with this. There is more in the tomb that needs to be resurrected. Jesus said, come out. And now you can watch yours come out. Courage, come out. Hope, in the midst of a militaristic president, come out. Love walks out. Joy walks out. Peace walks out. The life-giving force of God and the human spirit comes out. Amen? Amen.